Well, hello and welcome to Customer Engagement 101, brought to you by Upshot.ai, a podcast where we talk about the latest advancements in customer engagement, gamification, and share hacks to boost your customer retention. This is your host, Kaustuv, and today we have a very special guest who brings in more than 5 years of experience when it comes to helping companies all around the world deal with one of their biggest nightmares, and that is retaining their customers. Krishna Chaitanya, popularly known as Casey, is here with us today as we will be discussing all things gamification and his experiences with how you can save your app or website with retaining its best customers. So, welcome Casey to our podcast. And personally, I'm very happy to have you here on our pod where you can share your knowledge and experiences with our listeners who are just starting or trying to figure out gamification. So if you're listening on Spotify, please leave your comments in the Q&A section under this episode. If you're listening on Apple, Google, or anywhere in between, you could DM Krishna Chaitanya on LinkedIn or visit www.upshot.ai. So let's start today's episode by asking a question that's been a part of our tradition, which is how would Casey define gamification?
Hi, Kaustav, and it's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So, the question is about defining gamification.
Right.
My definition, which has helped me to understand and to explain this better, is increasing app and web user engagement through the implementation of psychological techniques that are traditionally used by game designers to create successful games. So that's how I would like to define gamification. Maybe I should repeat that. It's increasing app and web user engagement through the implementation of psychological techniques that are traditionally used by game designers to create highly successful games.
Well, that's a great way to put it. Why should someone pay attention to it, Casey?
Because if you are an app or web owner, if you're an owner of a product that's served through mobile apps or websites, user engagement matters critically to your success. And gamification, as it happens, is the best known way to create or boost user engagement. Now, I'm not saying that gamification is the only way to create user engagement because there are other important factors like really great UX design, good offers, and superb value that you have to provide to your users. These are not some things that you can do away with, but over and above these things, gamification is going to help boost your user engagement. And that is why, if you are an owner of an app or a website product, this is very, very important to you.
So, do you think deploying a game like interaction in a non game app, such as a banking app, would qualify as gamification?
I think the answer would be it depends. And maybe I can explain why. See, if the game like interaction that you're talking about is somehow organically related to the app's concept or its features, and it is designed thoughtfully to motivate users to do something useful to themselves and also to the bank, then probably we can call it gamification because it is a win win and it is related to the idea of the app and its features. But on the other hand, if it is something that is just, you know, cute, colorful, and fun, but it has been not very thoughtfully embedded into the overall context of the app. Uh, of course, this could have a very good reason why somebody might have wanted to do this. Maybe they wanted to give some fun engagement experience to the users. But I would say this is not gamification at all because it's not related to the app's concept or features. So it might just appear like relief to the users for some time, but it's not essentially going to drive outcomes.
Right.
And at this point, maybe I should go back to the definition
Hmm.
because there is something important that I said, and it might not be very obvious to some of our listeners. Uh, I mentioned that there is a bunch of psychological techniques which are traditionally used by game designers to build successful games. And I said that gamification is borrowing these techniques to increase your own app's engagement.
Right.
So this really needs a little bit of thought, because why are we considering games here? Why are we considering game designers here and not some other industries or some other examples? That's the first question that someone might have. And the second is, well, what are these psychological techniques? So I think it probably helps to talk about this for a minute or so. Games, they just happen to be universally known examples of high levels of engagement. Okay. Right? This is something we all can agree upon safely. And what is even more interesting is this engagement is voluntary. This is not someone asking or putting pressure on the gamer. The gamer wants to do it on their own, right? So it's very rare to have an example where there is a high degree of engagement which is entirely voluntary. Therefore, this is a very good example to learn from, because isn't it what every business wants out there? It wants that without much prodding, without much pushing, people should open that app frequently. They should spend time on it. They should spend money on it. That's exactly what everyone wants. And when we have an example of someone who has already achieved what we are also trying to achieve, then it makes a lot of sense to see what is it that they have done and try to do it yourself also. Right? It's more like we have a really good example to learn from. So learn from the best example out there. That's the reason why we picked games here.
Okay.
And well, coming to these techniques, psychological techniques, the reason I'm deliberately calling them psychological techniques is because I want to use a term that is broad enough to include visual techniques and non visual techniques. But what is common to both of them is that they influence the user's psychology. We don't want to restrict ourselves to something which only looks good. In other words, we don't want to emphasize the visual too much. At the same time, we don't want to emphasize the concept too much. The idea is that whether it is something visual you're trying to do or something non visual, the technique has got to be fundamentally aimed at the psychology of the user, right? Okay. That focus should not be missed here, that the importance of that term should not be missed here. And so we don't need to get into what those techniques are, but it's good to know that game designers for decades have known these techniques and they have used them to make really successful games. So all that matters now to is learn what those techniques are and use them for business.
Okay. Okay. So, what is your take on reward points?
Okay, so that's a pretty big topic in its own right, because there's an entire industry around it, the loyalty industry or the reward point industry. Yeah. But simply put, I think these things can be pretty effective or ineffective depending again on the psychological impact. Now, throughout this conversation, I'll be going back to that idea of psychological impact, because that's what we are chasing here. We are not chasing anything which is not going to be impactful. Right? So there are case studies where reward points have been extremely successful in influencing the psychology of people, and to that extent, I would call them successful gamification. Right? Because why is it so? They The long story is that after you get these points, what do you do with them? That's a question which naturally comes to the user.
Of course.
Yeah. Now, what are the options the company is giving me? Are those options somehow to my interest? So these are the big questions, right? If I can find good answers to these questions, then I like those points. But if I feel that these points have accumulated, but I'm not able to get what I want with these points, then to that user, it's like a dead end street. There is nothing to look forward there. And for that person, this reward point would not have succeeded psychologically, and hence it's not a gamification. Right? So it's a nuanced answer, but I think again I'm trying to emphasize the idea of, did you pull the strings of people? Did you get into their heads and make them change how they think about it? If yes, it's gamification. If not, it's not.
All right. So that brings me to my next question, which is for something to be called gamification, does it need to look like a game?
Well, I think we already talked about it during the definition.
Right, right.
By the way, it's an excellent question because it doesn't need to be looking like a game. It just needs to create the same impact on the individual like a game would, right? So what we are going after is the same type of impact, not the same type of looks. I hope that answers the question.
Definitely, definitely. So, what are some of the biggest advancements that you have seen in gamification in the past year?
I think the biggest advance would be that it is being used more and more by especially by the really well-known brands. Talking about the Indian context, I've seen Amazon use it in their fun zone. Google is using it heavily in Google Pay. Flipkart, although it's a second-hand information, I'm not personally a user of Flipkart, but I hear that Flipkart also is now doing things in this space. In fact, one of Upshot's clients, Aditya Birla Health Insurance, they do it in their app. So that's the biggest thing that I've seen because people have started using it, and this is great because it's great for the industry of gamification because once the leaders start using it, right, it automatically gets approval, it gets validation, and therefore many other businesses they begin to take it seriously and they move in that direction.
Okay.
Right? So this is good news for gamification as well as for those who are going to take it seriously because it is producing results. It's not an accident that the big brands with deep pockets are now beginning to put those dollars behind gamification, right? So there is in it something that other companies also are going to chase in the future. That's what I strongly feel.
Right, right. So, in your 5 years of experience with customer engagement platforms, what are some of the what were some of the brands that started this entire journey? I mean, what actually revolutionized gamification for us?
I think it would be safe to say that gamification has been around in different forms for a long time.
Right.
And if you now go back after you listen to this podcast, and if you go back and explore the idea of what had psychological impact on customers or users, you will agree with me that gamification has been around for a long, long time, right? But I can give you some examples that I happen to remember for the simple reason that they made an impact on me.
Yeah. We would
Uh,
like to know that.
yeah, because they motivated me to start doing stuff that I did not want to do before.
Okay.
So the first one that I would recall is the Apple Fitness app. This is there on Apple Watches, and I think with the latest upgrades, it's also there in the iOS on the phones. Now here, there is a ring. There is a circular ring which closes on itself when you reach your daily movement goal. So, for example, you set 300 calories as a goal daily. When you walk enough or run enough and you burn that calories, the ring closes, right? Now you can say, well, Casey, what's so great about a ring closing? The alternative would have been to show a number.
Okay.
For example, if you have walked enough to burn 200 calories today, the default option would have been to show you have burned 200 out of 300 calories, 100 more to go. So the gap between what you have done so far and your goal is being shown numerically, right? The representation is numerical. Or someone might even want to show it like a line which is incomplete. But what I think Apple has done very, very well here is they've chosen a circle. And why I feel this is so awesome is because if it is incomplete, it is going to drive you nuts.
Right.
It's going to drive you nuts. Your focus now has actually shifted from walking those dreaded 10,000 steps to closing the circle. This is brilliant because what they have done is they have transformed the problem. Okay, it's no longer taking 10,000 steps. It's all about closing the ring. Okay. Now this is very clever because it's visual and it's very it's not something that makes me even want to calculate how much is left. All I want is to see that ring close. Okay. So it plays upon my psychology. Again, we are back to that term, right? Therefore, I feel it's a phenomenal example of gamification. And of course, they have started making it personalized. Their notifications now call you by your first name and all that good stuff, which is over and above the fundamental fact that it is now gamified, right? The second example that I can again from my own personal life recall is some years ago I took membership in the American Express membership rewards credit card. I just happened to be walking around in the Mumbai airport when I was sold that card. And what I really like about that card, now this is an example of a reward point program, which goes back to one of your questions. This is an example of reward point program classifying as excellent gamification because it has caused change in me and in many other people. It's a very successful card. It's got only two rules to remember. Make four transactions of 1500 rupees or more per month
Hmm.
and you will get 1,000 points.
Okay.
Exceed 20,000 rupees per month of expenditure and you'll get another 1,000 points. There are only two rules to remember to the game. Okay. And it is, I can see myself doing it. The day that girl who was selling me the card told me, sir, all you need to do is to make four transactions of, back in the day it was 1,000 rupees or more. I could visualize myself easily making those transactions because you go grocery shopping and you do some other small things, it's going to happen, right? I saw myself doing it, and hence there was no reason not to do it, right? Which is again a psychological angle to it because if I'm able to see myself doing something, chances are very high that I will do it,
Of course.
right? So these are two amazing examples that I can recall, and it really pulled my strings.
Okay. So that brings me to my next question, which is, was there any place you never imagined to see gamification, but there is now?
Yeah, I don't know how accurate this is going to be, but I think in my own awareness, the HR benefits gamification in that space came to my awareness very recently.
Okay.
Okay. What that means is there are now companies, increasingly more and more companies, who are now going to reward their employees with points and privileges if they hit their learning goals. For example, you want to have an employee base that is constantly upskilling itself, constantly learning the latest technologies. The old way was to make it part of your appraisal and whatnot, right? And there is, it's always debatable whether that works or not. But some of the companies have started moving towards implementing point programs and implementing benefit programs, which will help employees reward good stuff if they hit their learning goals. So to that extent, I feel it is the latest industry to hit my awareness. It could be because of my own ignorance of that industry for all these years, but I feel that it's something that has come to my awareness much after other industries like e-commerce and all. And another very unusual example is I saw gamification in hearing aid devices.
Okay.
Those things that help people hear better. Now, I worked briefly on a project as a consultant about 3 years ago when we gamified the adoption of a hearing aid device for senior citizens. And the problem there was that the first time users of these devices who had excellent hearing all their lives until now, until that point, and couldn't hear very well thereafter, they did not get used to these devices. And so they would tend to drop out after trying those devices for some time. And dropping out from that kind of a product usage would make them more lonely because they were unable to participate in conversations because they were unable to hear. So the problem statement that was brought to us was, can you influence these people so that they continue using the device, and once they experience the benefits of using it, they will not leave it, right? So we did some sort of gamification there, although you know I'm not able to disclose what that was, but it was amazing to see that it solved that problem. And it was for senior citizens, and it was not even visual. It was gamification done using audio, and that also worked.
Right, right. So 2022 has been an amazing year in the field of gamification, right? I mean, what predictions do you have for the coming year, like 2023? What do you expect? How do you see the field of gamification changing?
One thing is that the adoption is going to increase.
Okay.
Okay, and it's for the same reason that I mentioned earlier, that the big ones are doing it, so there will be a lot of emulation of that among the other companies. That is what I am fairly confident about is going to happen. But when it comes to my hopes, right, I am hoping to see classier, more subtle use of gamification, because the kind of uh, designs and deployments that I've seen are still visually quite close to the feel of a game, right? um, so when I mentioned psychological techniques, I said it need not restrict itself only to making it look like a game. Sometimes even if it doesn't look like a game, but if it has the impact, it is still good. So I would like to see companies doing leveraging gamification in a more subtle manner, and especially it's very useful for those who come from serious businesses, such as banks, or maybe insurance, or they might not be able to see themselves doing these highly colorful interactions, right, on the mobile apps. So for them also, it's a very good opportunity to explore the non-visual aspects of gamification, the more subtle forms. That's what I hope should take place in 2023. And it's a shame when something as powerful as gamification is just thrown aside as oh, this doesn't apply to my business. And this should not happen, because it's not restricted to something that looks cute and looks like a game. It can be very effective. So that's what I feel is going to happen, and I want that to happen in 2023.
Okay, okay. So speaking about industries, with what is that one industry that you've seen gamification being used the most?
In the Indian context, I would say it's got to be fintech, especially the payment apps. I think Google Pay is really taking it to the next level, and Phone Pay has its own flavor. So I feel that in the payment, these two are definitely are doing it. I'm not a user of Paytm, so I don't know if they do it also. But if some of our listeners know, they can also put it in the comments.
Of course, of course. So what do you think about Cred in that case?
Cred, I forgot. It's good you reminded me. I'm a big fan of Cred. Cred is an extremely good example of very simple gamification, right? The concept is extremely simple. There are two things there which I would like to draw attention to. One is, of course, the straightforward thing of giving you coins for making payment. Right? If you make 1,000 rupees payment towards your credit card bill, you get 1,000 coins. Simple. And like I mentioned earlier in this discussion, what do you do with those coins? Right? That's where Cred excels, because they have a large variety of things that you can do with those 1,000 coins. You can buy things for yourself. You can donate to charity. You can maybe take part in some global environmental causes. You can plant a tree, whatnot. I know my father donated some of his Cred coins to plant trees somewhere. So everybody can use their coins in the way that is most meaningful to them, which is awesome. The second thing that I like in Cred, which also, according to me, falls under gamification, is their very simple notification which tells you how fast your credit card payment happened. If you notice, they send you a push notification right after the payment goes through saying that was fast. It was done in like 13.5 seconds or something like that. On the outside, it looks like a simple notification, but look at the intention behind it. It's designed to hit your psychology as, wow, this is fast. This was really fast. Although we don't know how fast other apps are, right? But these people went one step ahead and actually are publishing their speed, which other apps are not doing. Right?
Right.
So I feel that that's another way to make a psychological impact on your users. Now you feel Cred is fast and you don't even have a benchmark because no one else is saying anything. So you would rather believe that Cred is the fastest.
Yes, yes, yes. What is your take on food tech like Swiggy and Zomato? Are they a good industry in 2023 to explore gamification? Or if they already have, like, how do you see that growing?
Yes, I and I don't know how I left that out, but Swiggy and Zomato certainly have entered gamification already. For example, the Swiggy Super is a good example of gamification, although it doesn't look like it. It looks like a membership program, something like Amazon Prime.
Right, right,
But the thing is that there is good evidence in the case of Amazon that people who subscribe to Prime actually buy more products, right? Somehow the fact that free shipping, it plays on them so much that it makes them order more. It never occurs to them that they're spending more money ordering more things, but they love the fact that it is free shipping. Okay, and isn't that psychological in its essence, right? The same thing with Swiggy Super. Just because they say, and they emphasize it, they say no delivery fees even in peak time, right? So they are basically selling your own decision back to you, saying what an awesome decision you made, right? That's creating a psychological impact. Delivery fees is not there, so I might as well order this and that and maybe that too. Right?
especially after COVID, you see like these food tech companies have grown massively, and the implementation of gamification has directly impacted them.
Yeah, and have you noticed also the other thing, Kaustuv, that when you order items from a restaurant which you already order, you don't find that many coupons in Swiggy. But when you are trying to go for a new restaurant, they'll give you something like, try new or try new, right? I love that. And it kind of made an impression on me. And look at how awesome that is because it's making me try out more restaurants through Swiggy.
Right,
So I feel more warm towards Swiggy, that through you I've got to know about more restaurants, I've tried more dishes. So there is now more of a relationship between me and Swiggy. And I also love the fact that they gave me 100 rupees off or whatever, right?
right. At the same time, it provides a platform for new restaurants to promote their products. Possibly, they might cancel the offer later on,
Yeah,
but
they'll recover.
definitely like places that have recently opened, it provides a good platform for them also to grow.
Yeah. So you look at it again, the psychological impact is really clear there, right? So this is why I would consider it also as a very cleverly done gamification.
So that brings me to my next question, which is, what advice would you give to people who are starting out their gamification journey?
The first piece of advice is you've got to believe in it. Okay, there is enough evidence and there is enough proof so that you no longer can doubt its legitimacy. First of all, right? It is incredibly powerful and you can trust it to deliver the goods. That's the first thing that I would like to say. The second piece of advice that I have for people who are starting out is there is a lot of content on the internet about gamification,
Of course.
right? So read up on it. There's no excuse for you not to read up on stuff that people have taken so much time to write. uh, Yukai Chao, he's one of my all-time favorites. His Octalysis framework, something that I myself learned a lot from.
It's brilliant.
It's brilliant, right? And all this is available for free. Can you believe it? You don't even need to take an expensive course to learn all this stuff. So read up on it. Thirdly, and this is where it gets interesting, I want people to learn from their own experience, because first of all, nothing can beat it when you realize something in your own mind and heart. Wow, I'm realizing it through my own experience. See, you're the user of so many apps, right? And you have your own favorites. So if you have an open mind and if you have a careful eye, right, you can start looking for gamification or psychological impact, as we are talking about it, in your favorite apps. And I'm quite confident that chances are that you will find it either in a very straight overt form or in a very subtle form, right? And how would you recognize gamification? The benchmark is very simple. If it exerts a pull on you, right, that's it. That's enough for you to become curious about it, because if it had an effect on you, what prevents it from having effect on other people?
Right.
Right, we are pretty similar in how we get affected by things, actually, even though we don't realize it. So if you understand how you yourself got influenced by your favorite apps, you will not have any trouble believing in gamification as a concept. And once you understand that, hey, I got affected by it, so there is a great chance that I can actually learn about it and create impact for my users. So these are the three advices that I would give.
That's great. So I know you get asked this a lot, but what are some of the hacks that you can share with our listeners for acing the customer engagement game in 2023?
I'm not sure about hacks, to be honest. Probably the neatest hack would be a brain hack, right? In the sense that you just tell yourself that this is really important and it deserves your time and exploration.
Right.
And I say it with all due seriousness, because if you don't start something, how will you ace it? Right? Your question is on how do you ace it. I'm saying get started first, right? And if you've already started, I say congrats, well done, right? Because for you, my hack would be to go back to your own favorite apps and to understand how they're influencing you, right? I cannot advise this enough, because if you learn from your own experiences, that's the best kind of learning, right? When other people give you some theory, you always have a question: how far is it true? And then you also need to get some validation. But if you have been influenced yourself, what is there to validate anymore?
Makes sense.
The proof of the pudding is with you, right?
Right.
So yeah, if you haven't started, get started. If you have already started, learn from your own experience.
Right. So any pitfalls or mistakes that you've seen people make often when where gamification is concerned?
Yeah, this actually is a very important question. And so there is a huge mistake which I see people making, and it's very common, right? We can almost call it a garden variety mistake, right? Is to translate gamification into games, because they both sound quite similar, right? Please don't do that, right? They are not the same. Games are games, right? But gamification is actually meant for non-game scenarios, right? So if you are getting curious about gamification, you may encounter a lot of people who might try to influence you by saying that if you somehow plug in some games, you have gamified your app.
Hmm.
That's a big mistake.
Okay.
It goes back to the question you asked me earlier about if there is a game like interaction in a banking app, right? And I pointed out this thing at that time, that it's not about a game like interaction. Gamification is about the impact, right? Probably it's the 20th time I'm saying this in this podcast, that it's about the impact, right? So don't translate gamification loosely into the idea of, hey, let me plug in some games and hence I've done gamification. Don't do this. It's a big mistake. The and the only way around this pitfall is to always chase impact, psychological impact, right? Not in the manner in which it looks and feels. The second big mistake is to, again, this is pretty garden variety, is to try to launch your own rewards program or some points and badges program, some sort of leaderboard. In gamification, it's called PBL. It's a much hated acronym: points, badges, and leaderboards. And for good reason, because most people's immediate rush is, hey, let me launch my own points program and let me give some badges. Maybe call the user some superstar or something and hope that it'll do the trick, right? No, you have to be a little patient. You have to figure out uh, whether whatever you are doing for your app or website actually is going to have an impact on the motivation of the user or not, right? And as long as you aim for that and not aim for something that looks like a game, you are going to avoid this pitfall.
Right, right. So, for our listeners who are starting with gamification, what books or podcasts could you recommend? Like,
So one thing I've already mentioned is reading up everything on Yukai Chow's website. Just go to that guy's website and just read up everything there, and you will be doing yourself a huge favor, because this is knowledge that will stand in good stead for the rest of your life as a product owner or a marketer, especially the Octalysis framework. That's the core of what he offers. A pretty good book which I like is Business Gamification for Dummies. So there is this Dummies series, right? So they've taken out a book called Business Gamification, and it's written by, I think, the people who founded Bunchball or one of those gamification platform companies, uh, something similar to Upshot. And it lays out this whole idea of gamification step by step, and it clearly guides you on how to design a gamification project, right? Podcasts, I'm not sure, but there are plenty of good webinars which are close cousins of podcasts. In fact, we have done things here at Upshot with people like Roman and others. So they are available on uh, YouTube. So YouTube's your best friend here.
okay. So, well, that was a very interesting and insightful discussion, and we would definitely like to hear more from you in the future. Please let us know in the comments if you liked our episode. Thank you so much, Casey, for joining us today. And a very special thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Have a great day ahead. Cheers.